Hi, folks, and today I thought we'd talk a little bit about cross training. So, during this time of COVID, which is when I'm recording this, I've been doing a lot more cross training, a lot in about 3.5 hours more per week than what I was doing before. I think it has absolutely made a difference in my aerobic fitness. So, let's talk about cross training. So, first of all, like many things in running, cross training has many definitions depending upon who you talk to. In general, there's going to be three. One, some people will view any exercise as cross training. So let's take, for example, strength training. If it's any exercise, then that group would say, well, strength training is cross training. Another group will say, no, it can't just be any exercise. It's got to be aerobic because running's an aerobic event. So as long as it's any exercise and aerobic, then that counts as cross training. In this particular case, then strength training wouldn't count because although there's a way you can do strength training to make it aerobic, by and large, strength training is not an aerobic activity. Now, strength training is great, not saying it's not great, but it wouldn't count as cross training. On the other hand, cycling would. And then the final group says, hey, it's got to be aerobic and it needs to largely mimic running or it's not cross training. So in that particular case, cycling wouldn't count. Elliptical probably would because elliptical is very similar to running. So the way I look at cross training personally is that any aerobic activity I'm going to count as cross training because I think that does mimic running in that it might be a different motion. Cycling, swimming, whatever is a different motion. But running is an aerobic event. And since those are aerobic things, I would kind of count them as cross training. Now, I came across an article the other day which really kind of prompted this entire video, and I will try to remember to post a link to that article down below in my comments that talked about how you can use different cross-training activities, specifically cycling and swimming this case, and kind of compare them to running. It uses a point system, and I've seen this before, I just haven't seen the points. So what they're saying is, if you run a quarter mile, it's worth 1 point. If you do a mile on the bike, or spin, that's worth a point, and a 100-meter swim is worth a point. Or another way to look at that is you need 4 times as many miles on the bike to be equivalent of a mile when running, and for 100 meters, you need, 16? You need 16 of those in swimming to be equivalent to the mile of running. So that's how they kind of line those up. Again, I'll put the link in there. Now, when you cross-train, you're generally going to be cross-training for one of two reasons. You are either looking to supplement the running that you're doing, or you're looking to replace some of the running. So supplement is what I'm doing right now. I'm not running any less than I was before. I'm just cross-training more, so I am adding on to that. What would replacing be? There's a couple different options. Actually, to some extent, I do replace now, but that's been that way for several years. I used to run about 6 days a week, most weeks. Over the last few years, I've been down to 5. The idea being getting older, pounding on the body. So in that case, I replaced some of that running with cross training to make sure I was getting the same aerobic benefit. But again, you're either going to supplement it or you're going to replace. Now, the key thing with those activities is they have to be aerobic. And the reason I say that is that I'll use cycling as an example, is somebody will say, hey, I got 12 miles cycling and it was great. That's my cross training. But what they did was they rode with their kids to the ice cream shop and they stopped for 30 minutes at ice cream and they rode back and they never broke a sweat. That's a great activity. You should be spending time with the family. I'm not saying don't do that, but I wouldn't count that as cross training because it wasn't aerobic. What you want to do is kind of get your effort up into that paragraph pace like you would on a long run, or if you're doing something harder, you can certainly replicate tempo work or hard work in those areas as well. Heart rate is trickier to go by because your heart rate tends to be different in those activities than it would be running. But again, the key being to really count as cross training, it should be sustained aerobic activity and it should be a kind of a similar effort to what you would get with running. Now, going back to supplemental, if you're supplementing, then it's bonus. So really this thing about counting points, I don't think that matters if you're doing the supplement because anything you do is just adding on. So what the heck do you care what they might consider the points to be for that? Now, on the other hand, if you're looking to replace, you're injured, you can't do something else, well, that can be a little bit better way to say, how do I replace what I was doing with running to try and maintain some of my aerobic fitness? So this would say, for example, if you're running 30 miles a week and for some reason you can't run anymore, but you can spin or you can bike, then doing 120 miles aerobically would give you the same kind of aerobic benefit, at least close. Now, obviously, if you're not doing that type of miles, you wouldn't ramp up to that, but you get the idea of the equation. It's also important to note that nothing replaces running. So in the example I just gave, you're not able to run at all. Believe me, the cycling, swimming, whatever you do is going to be far better than doing nothing. But doing just that isn't really going to totally replace running. I don't care how much you do about it. The way you get better at running is running. The way you get better at golfing is golfing. You've got to do that thing to get better at it. And here's an example of that, and I'll use Lance Armstrong as an example. Let's put all the drug use aside. So Lance Armstrong, after he retired from cycling, said, I'm going to go out and I'm going to do the New York Marathon. And he figured he's got this giant aerobic base that he has built from cycling all those years. And with a little bit of training, he's going to go out and be able to kill it at the New York Marathon. He had a pretty good race, but he fell short of what he thought he would do. That's because he didn't have enough running yet. So he had all this aerobic base, but you still got to have the running, because when you're cycling, you're not using your arms the same way. The leg muscles are being used differently. You don't get some of the mitochondria in the arms. You don't get used to the endurance of pounding on the ground all the time. So again, cross-training, great. Use it to replace. It's certainly better than nothing, but it's not going to get everything. So kind of in summary, cross-training really helps. I think a lot of people, they just love to run, so they shy away from cross-training. But supplementing your running with some cross-training can make you a stronger runner. And certainly if for some reason you can't run, can be a great replacement.